Kakadosh Baruch Hu, Masechet Moed Katan, the Bet Amud Aleph, Moed Katan 2a. We're starting in the Mishnah. Remember the Masechet Moed Katan at the beginning, like the way that it sounds, Moed Katan. So therefore the Moed is the Chagim. Moed Katan here we're going to start talking about Chol Moed. And since a lot of the halachot of Chol Moed are also applied to Shemitah, we're going to apply it to the sabbatical as well. Remember that this year's Shemitah and it's Israel. So the Mishnah is going to start as follows. Remember that on Chol Moed you're not allowed to work. But why? Because of anything to do with Tircha Yitzirah, it's going to be prohibited. However, though, for a Davar Aved, something which is going to get lost, ruined, something that's, so then you're allowed to work on Chol Moed. So it says the Mishnah, Mashkin bet shlachin, one may irrigate, one may water an irrigated field. So somebody could put mashkin, lashon lashkot, to the bet shlachin. Bet shlachin is a field which needs a lot of water. B'moed u'v'shvit, whether it's going during Chol Moed or during Shemitah. Ben mimayan sheyatza b'techila, whether from a mayan is like a spring which was already flowing, or ben mimayan shelo yatza b'techila, or a spring that was not flowing yet. Aval en mashkin, but you cannot water this field. Lo mimei geshamim v'lo mimei kilon, not from a pool of rainwater that's mei geshamim, which means the rainwater fell into a certain area, surface, and then you're having it there, or from mea kilon. Mea kilon is water from a well. Ve'eno sinu giyot lagefanim, and you could also make ditches around the grapevines in order to collect the rainwater, which means they used to make like a ditch around it, and then rain would come in, and then that would give it the rain that would be needed for the vineyard. You're not allowed to do that. Okay? A ditch. A ditch is like. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, so he's going to argue, and he's saying you're not allowed to make this amma at the beginning, whether it's during Chol Moed or Shemitah. The Chachamim say, you are allowed to make a new irrigation canal. So in the olden days, what they used to do was, they used to make an irrigation canal, which means that they used to, let's say, for example, they had water going through certain areas of the city. They would come and dig, right, in order that there would be a path of the water going straight into my field. So can I make that new irrigation canal into my property during Shavit or not, or also during Chol Moed or not? Elazar ben Azariah says you're not allowed to. Chachamim say you're allowed to. And you are allowed to fix the ones which were damaged on Chol HaMoed. Okay? Umetaknin et kilkulei hamayim shebeshut rabim. You're allowed to repair also any types of cisterns in the public domains, which means, again, any types of water canals or water ditches or anything to do with water in the public. V'chotatinotan, and you're allowed to be, right, to clear it out. V'chatet, right, is to clear something out. So he says, Umetaknin et hadrachim et rechovot, you're allowed to repair roads, right, and also streets. V'mikvot hamayim, and also the mikvehs. You're allowed to make anything which are public necessities. And you're allowed to also be mitzayen kevarot, which means to put marks on tombstones. And you're allowed to go out also on kilayim. These are all things which are tzorchei rabim, which are allowed to be done, whether it's going to be on the Shemitah, during the Shemitah year, or during Chol HaMoed. Okay, until here we're clear? Very good. Says the Gemara. The Gemara says, now, if you're just telling me that if it's going to come from a newly emerged spring, which means something which is new, right? Where you could say where you could say that it could collapse. So it says mashkin, you could give water on Chol Moed. So once again, if you just said right now that a mayan, which is a spring, which was already there, right? It was already from a newly emerged spring. Which technically it could collapse, because again, you always have the fear that since it's new, it could collapse, the walls could collapse, and then it's not going to be good. And still mashkin. So then from a spring which is not new, where we don't have that suspicion, is it necessary to write it at all that it's going to be permitted? For sure it should be permitted. Says the Gemara, Amri, they said, if you still need it. Why do you still need it? Itana mayan sheyatza b'techila, if the Mishnah only taught you a mayan, which came out of the beginning, which means a spring which is newly formed, Havamin, I would have thought to say, only in this case where it's going to be a beta shlachin, which is basically in the case of an irrigated field. But what about the beta ba'al? Beta ba'al is a rainwater field, which means that it's enough just with the rain, and you don't need. Look in Rashi. Rashi says, Bet Baal sadehu, right? Be'emek ve'no tzrich lashkotah. Ve'em ba'efsed imen mashkinotah, which means Bet Baal is that it gets rain and it doesn't need anything else. Bet Shlachin, it needs constant rain, right? You always need to put rain. It's not just enough rainwater. Certain types, and by the way, you should see that even with plants. Certain plants, it rains, it must be. That's already enough. You don't need anything else. Other things, no, you have to also physically come and start putting rain, because it's not enough the rainwater. So that's the difference between a beta baal and beta shlachim. So he says, Havamina, I would have thought to say, Hachau the beta shlachim over here, right? Where we're going to be in the beta shlachim, yes, beta baalo, mishum de'ati le'ampule. Because what's going to happen is it could come to collapse. Aval mayan shelo yatsa b'techila. But a mayan, or spring, which is not newly emerged, de'lo ati le'ampule, that it's not going to come and collapse. Ema afilu beta baal nami. So I would have thought to say that even a rainwater field could also be watered from it. Because if it's not going to collapse, what's the problem? Let the water go through it. The gamarnu, I'm not going to fix anything. Nothing's going to happen. Everything's going to be good. Kamashmanan comes teach you, Loshna mayan sheyatsa b'techila velo mayan shelo yatsa b'techila. There's no difference between the mayan that was already emerged. That means it already started or didn't start. Beta shlachin is going to be permitted. Beta baal is going to be prohibited. Why beta baal prohibited? Because it only needs rainwater. Where are you going to start doing extra work if you don't need to? If you don't need to, you don't do it. So says the Gemara, how do you know that beta shlachim is an expression that you need thirst, that you're thirsty for water? Because that's what it is, beta shlachim. So he says, the Chtiv was written in a pasuk, ve'ata ayef v'yagea. And what's the explanation? What is the targum? Right? What is the targum of ve'ata ayef v'yagea? You're tired and exhausted. What does that mean? Targeminan ve'at meshalhe bela'eh. You were meshalhe and exhausted. Okay? That's what it says, meshalhe, right? Or meshalhe, right? Vela'eh. So he says over here, the letters he and chet are interchangeable. That's what Rashi here says. You say ve'he mitchalef bechet many times. That's why even people, they make a mistake and they interchange them, right? Which means in the way that it's pronounced. Okay? So he says, so because of that, the shalhe is really like meshalche, shlachim. So therefore, you're going to be thirsty and you're going to be exhausted. So says the Gemara, okay, fine. So that's why beta shlachim means a field which is very thirsty, a field that you constantly have to give it water. How do you know the beta baal is an expression of being settled, right? Okay, that you could say it's from the baal, no, a husband and a wife, they're settled. So he says, "Dichtiv kival bachur betula." Is aftarat azinu when it says this is when it's written as a young man lives with a betula, right, with a virgin, so too your children will live in you. Metargeminan, what do we say? Arei kema demitotav ulam im betulta. Just like a young man settles down with his virgin, yatvitunan begavech benaich. Your children will settle with you as well. So therefore, it's an lashon that you're settled down. When a person gets married, he calms down. He hopefully doesn't do any more shtuyot. It's a different mindset. So what happens is that's why the lashon of beta baal means a settled, how do you call it? A settled field. Okay, fine. Mantana the pseidain harvachalo. Who is the Tana of the Mishnah that he says that something which is going to be a loss, which is a pseda, lashon have said that you're going to lose, that can be done on Chol Moed, but for harvacha, which means that I want to make money for a profit, that I'm not allowed to do that. And even in a place of pseda, of loss, right? We're not going to do any type of too much of a work of a toil. You're not allowed to do tircha. So he says, Ravuna says, Eliezer ben Yaakov. It's Eliezer ben Yaakov. That means Eliezer ben Yaakov is the author that says only bimkom ifsed mutar harvachalo, which means if there's a loss, yes, a gain, no. Plus, even if it's going to be a makom of loss, you're not allowed to do a lot of tircha. Titnam, as we learned in the Mishnah, Eliezer ben Yaakov says, okay, this is going to be later on in the Vav Mubet. So it says, you can divert the water from one tree to another tree on Chol Moed, which means, let's say you have tons of water under one tree, another tree has no water. So what are you allowed to do? You're allowed to divert the water in order that the water should travel to the other tree, so that way you have it also underneath the other tree. But as long as you're not allowed to come and give to drink, right? Basically to put water throughout the entire field, which means that the area between the trees, you're not allowed to, because by doing so, you're improving the entire field, and that's not preventing loss. That means if you're gonna have a tree that doesn't get water at all, that's a loss. The tree could die out, the gamarnu. But if it's going to be that you're watering the entire field, that's not that means that's it's not a loss. That's you want to gain. So says the Gemara, okay, fine. You're right. Here you see from that Mishnah that you're not allowed to do it for harvacha, which means that you're not allowed to do it for a gain. You could only do it to prevent a loss. So to prevent a ifsed, you're allowed to. But to do it for a gain, you're not allowed to. But where did you see that he's talking about also that even in the case of a loss, you're not allowed to do tircha? Where do we see such a thing? So says the Gemara, Rav Papa says, you're right. So it's not Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, because you can't see it from there. But who is it? Amani Rabbi Yehudahi. It's Rabbi Yehuda. Titania was learned to the Braita. The Braita says, when you have a spring that is emerging, that is bringing water, so according to this, you're allowed to give to drink, you're allowed to water even a field which is a betabal, which means even that it's enough for the rainwater. These are the words that Rabbi mean. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. You're only allowed to come and irrigate a beta shlachin. Remember, that means that you need a lot of water, which was destroyed, right? Which dried up, basically. Okay, charev, which is destroyed, which means that it dried up. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, lokach, neither this and neither that. Yater al ken amar Rabbi Yehuda says also Rabbi Yehuda, lo yifaneh adam amat hamayim v'yashkel ginato l'chol bato b'chol moed. A person cannot clean out the amat hamayim, which is irrigation canal, right, and for his garden or for his ruins on chol moed. So now the Gemara is going to try to analyze this Braita to try to say that this shita is the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Remember, one more time, we're trying to analyze, we're trying to focus. One more time on harvacha, which means to make money in chol moed or shemitah, asur. To prevent loss, mutar. But there's another condition. Even preventing loss, which is mutar, you cannot do tircha yitera. You cannot do too much tircha. So if it was without the last part about tircha yitera, it could have been Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. But since we said that it cannot be Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, because we didn't hear anything about what he said to do with the shita of that you cannot do too much tircha. So therefore now we're trying to say it's a Yehuda. Now we're trying to analyze it. Says the Gemara, "May charva." What does it mean that it dried up? If it got dried up, so so what's the purpose of watering it? Right? That's it. Amar Abaye says no. It dried up from one spring. That means the spring dried up, but there's another spring that came out. So since the field was accustomed to being watered from the first spring, Rabbi Yehuda says, okay, so now you could have the second spring. Why? Because once the field got accustomed to this, if you're going to take it away, it's a problem. Okay? So he says, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, lo kach velo kach. Not this or not the other. What does that mean? Lo shlacharav mayanav lo shna lo charav mayana. It doesn't matter whether it dried up or it didn't dry up. Mayan sheyatza b'techila. In both instances, when you're talking about a mayan that is newly emerged, you cannot use it. Not allowed to use it. That is shita av Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Remember, in there you had Rabbi Meir. The Rabbi Meir says you're allowed to be mashke everything, even a betabal. You had Rabbi Yehuda, which was the middle, right? And then you had the lechumra, which was Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He says lokach, lokach. You can never use a newly emerged amatamayim, a spring that goes, a mayan that goes through it. You can never use it. Okay. Umimai, right? So says the Gemara, on what basis do you say that the Tana of our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda? Dilma kan lo kama Rabbi Yehuda hat, right? Bet hashachim bet balo ela mayan sheyatza betchila. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda was only talking about his halacha to do with an irrigated field or a rainwater field. Remember, irrigation field means that you need to be irrigated. It's not just enough rain. That's called bet shlachim, right? That we said thirsty, right? The bet baal was that it's settled because it's like a husband and wife. They're settled. So therefore, right, it's a rainwater field. Ela mayan sheyatza betchila, only with regard to a newly emerged spring. Bet amud bet, to be, right? To be or not to be. Dilma atile ampule, why? Because maybe the walls of the spring are going to collapse, and therefore it cannot be used. Aval mayan shelo yatza betchila delo atile ampule, but a spring that is not newly emerged, which means that we can assume that the walls will not collapse. Because if you have a spring that has been there for such a long time, we're not going to suspect that all of a sudden today it's going to collapse. If it's something new, so then many times maybe it wasn't done properly, and all of a sudden you could have things collapsing from the sides. But here it's not going to. So to here, then you would, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, maybe you're going to say that even a rainwater field could also be watered. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda is not going to be exactly our Mishnah, because our Mishnah said only beta shlachin yes, beta baal lo. Okay.
So in this case,
If so, matniti neman tirmiya. So he says, one second. So then, who's our Mishnah? Then? At the end of the day, our Mishnah has to be in accordance to somebody. So you told me it's not Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. You Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. It's not Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. It's not Rabbi Yehuda. So who is it then? Ela Rabbi Yehuda. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, lo shna mayan sheyatza b'tchila v'lo shna mayan shelo yatza b'tchila. There's no difference between a mayan which was emerged at the beginning or not. Beta shlachin yes, beta ba'alo. So why do we tell you then mayan sheyatza b'tchila? To teach you the strength of Rabbi Meir, that he told me that even a mayan yotze b'tchila, mashkin meno filu beta. That means Rabbi Meir is like mamash on the left. That he's mamash mekel legamre. That even if it's a mayan sheyatza b'tchila, even if it's a newly emerged mayan, and even if it's a sedeh beta bal, which is also a leniency, you're still allowed to do that on Moed, and there's no problem. That's a chidush. But really, be'emet, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're right. There's no difference between the yatza b'tchila and lo yatza b'tchila. Beta shachin yes, beta bal lo, and then for our Mishnah is going to be like Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, itmar. It was stated. If somebody's going to weed and somebody is going to water seeds on the Shabbat, so he's weeding out and he's putting water and seeds on Shabbat. What is the hatra'ah you're going to give him? Which means like this: we know if a person is mechalel Shabbat chas v'shalom, we have to give them a warning, and then we give them the death penalty. If there's no warning, there's no death penalty. Right now, when a person comes and he has to do a melacha, if he's going to do a melacha, on Shabbat, so we have to warn them. If I make the wrong warning, so then it's not a good warning. Meaning, if somebody's going to come and say to a person, listen, don't kill. Why? Because if not, you're going to get lashes. And then he kills, and then you want to kill him, you can't do that. Because he was only warned for something different, which means that maybe if he would have been warned properly, he would have refrained from doing the action. So therefore, the Gemara is asking right now, what melacha do you warn when a person comes and he's minakesh or mashke mayim lezreim, which means he's weeding out or he's putting water on seeds on Shabbat. So Rabbah comes and he says, Mishum choresh, plowing. Rav Yosef says, Mishum zorea, because of planting. So now we're going to try to explain the two views. Okay? Right? Amar Rabbah comes and he says, it's more logical to say like me. Why? What is choresh? Do you know that in the olden days, right, we think that how do you start the 11 melachot of Shabbat? With planting. You don't start with planting, you start with plowing. Because the first thing that they used to do was they used to make soft the land. Once they used to make soft the land, then you were able to put the seeds and then you could plow again afterwards. But first you have to make soft the land. So he says, just like the darko of choresh is lerapuya ara, to make soft the land, hainamamirapuya ara, so to here you're making soft the land. So therefore, here you're being minakesh, you're weeding it, and you're putting water on seeds on Shabbat. You're making it soft. So Amar Rav Yosef says, no. It's more logical to say like me. Just like the normal manner of sowing, of planting, is to grow produce. So to here, when you're putting water on seeds on Shabbat, you're growing produce. So what's the problem? So Amalei Abaye le Rabba, comes Abaye and he tells Rabba, Ledidach kashya. So according to you, there's a difficulty. Or Rav Yosef kashya, and according to Rav Yosef, there's also a difficulty. Ledidach kashya, for you, there's a difficulty. Mishum choresh im mishum zorea lo. It's only choresh and not zorea. And Rav Yosef kashya, you also have a question. Mishum zorea im mishum choresh lo, which means to both. And the Gemara is asking on either one. Why are you, fighting which one? They're both. 1 second. Maybe you're going to tell me that if there's both, you're only going to be chayav one. Rav Kana says, Somer v'tzarich la'etzim, chayav shtayim. If you're going to prune and you need the wood, you're going to be chayav both of them. One because of notea and one because of kotzeh. So you see from here that you're going to be chayav two different things. One of notea, which is planting, but notea is with a tree. Zorea is planting of a seed. Notea is planting of a tree. It's always the general rule. There's a word for each one of them. And one of them is kotzeh, is reaping. So you see from here, the fact that somebody's going to come and he's going to to pluck off something from a tree, but you need the wood. You chayav on both. Okay, so it says the Gemara, Kashi, you're right. It's a difficulty. Itvei Rav Yosef leRabba. So Rav Yosef comes and he asks of Rabba. Okay, he challenges Rabba. Hamnakesh, remember, each one had their own shita. So now he's going to ask of this. Hamnakesh, somebody that pulls out weeds or covers the seeds, that's mechapeh, right? Lechapot, right? To cover, kilaim. Loke, he's going to get lashes. Rabbi Akiva says, Afa mekayem, even if somebody's just going to keep the kilaim there, he also gets lashes, meaning you didn't do anything. You just kept the lashes there. The mere fact that you're leaving the lashes stay there, it's going to be also the same. Says the Gemara one more time. So Rav Yosef comes and he asks Rabba, he's gonna get lashes. Loke. Rabbi Akiva says, even if mekayem, you're gonna get lashes. It's good according to me. Damina mishum zorea, that I'm going to say that somebody that's going to come and put water and pull weeds, he's going to be chayav mishum zorea. Hainu da asira zira belekilaim. That's what you're not allowed to do. Zriya bekilaim. Kilaim, you're not allowed to plant. Right? Ela ledidcha, but according to you, Damarta, that you said because of choresh, charisha bekilaim mi asira. Is there such a prohibition of choresh by kilaim? Obviously not. So therefore, I would say that pulling weeds is not a tolodav plowing of choresh, but rather zorea. So that's Rav Yosef asking against Rabba. Okay? So Amaleh, he comes and he answers Mishum Mekayem. He says, no, you're right. That's because of Mekayem Kilaim, not because of the Zorea Kilaim, because of Mekayem Kilaim. In the fact that you come and you left it there, you're also going to get lashes because of Mekayem Kilaim. The Hamid Yitzani says, but then the Seifa said, Rabbi Akiva says, Afa Mekayem Kilaim. Mikal the Tanakama, La Mishum Mekayemu. So it's mashman Tanakama didn't know because of Mekayem. Because if you told me 2 seconds later, Rabbi Akiva says, Afa Mekayem is going to get lashes. If you're going to leave the kilaim there, you get lashes. So Tanakama was not talking about Mekayem. So he says, right, the Amalem Mishum Mekayem. So Makla, the Tanakama lo Mishum Mekayem. And so the Gemara, Kula Rabbi Akiva, that entire Braita was Rabbi Akiva. Umay Ta'am, come on, but it was bringing us the reason. What does that mean? My Ta'am, Amnakesh v'mechape b'kilaim lokeh, meaning like this. The Braita says, Hamnakesh v'mechape b'kilaim lokeh. Right? If somebody's going to pull out weeds or he's going to cover the seeds of kilaim, is going to be lokeh. Why? Rabbi Akiva Omer, but the entire thing was Rabbi Akiva. So therefore, since the entire thing is Rabbi Akiva, makes sense. Right? My tam kaman. My tam anakesh v'mechape b'kilaim lokeh. Yishu mekayem shel Rabbi Akiva Omer. Afa mekayem is going to get lashes. My tam ad Rabbi Akiva. What's the reasoning of Rabbi Akiva? Meaning, why does he say that even if you leave it there and you're being mekayem kilaim, you're going to get lashes? The Tanya is learned to the Braita. So the chalot izra kilaim. You're not allowed to plant kilaim. Enli ela zorea. That's only planting. Mekayem inayin. How do you know that even mekayem you're not allowed to leave the kilaim? Tamulomar kilaim sadecha lo, which means the Torah says kilaim in your field, no. So therefore, because the Torah says b'emtecha lo tabia kilaim sadecha lo tizra kilaim. So when it says sadecha lo tizra, right? So we're learning from there, right? Kilaim b'sadecha lo. Right? Because even though it's written b'emtecha lo tarbia kilaim, you could also read it kilaim sadecha lo. So it's not only just lo tizra kilaim. You could also read it in the Torah, do not have the kilaim. So do not maintain kilaim. So therefore, that's also going to be an isur of maintaining the kilaim.
Okay.
We're going back to the part of the Mishnah where it says, now we learned in the Mishnah, mashkim betashlachim b'moed u'b'shvit. So you could water an irrigated field during Chol HaMoed and during Shvita. Bishlam HaMoed, I understand Chol HaMoed, b'shum tircha. The entire concept is because of tirchai. We don't want you to start working and doing other things. Pay attention to the Moed. Uvimkom pseida shorbaram, but it's going to be a loss. The rabbis made it okay. But Shvi'it, which is Shemitah, ben leman damar mishum zorea, ben leman mishum choresh, whether it's because of zorea or choresh, planting or plowing, zriya v'charisha b'shvim mishari, none of them is permitted on Shvi'it. So why is it permitted? Meaning, I understand, on Chol HaMoed, it's tircha. We don't want you to, okay, it's going to be a pseida, have said, the rabbis say, in order not to get a loss, to incur a loss, okay, do it. But here, it's Shemitah. Shemitah, you're not allowed to plow. You're not allowed to plant. You're not. So what's going on? So Abaye says, Bishvit b'zman hazeh. We're talking about Bishvit nowadays. Right? The Rebbe here, and it's according to Rebbe. What does that mean? Because the Shvit nowadays is only midrabanan. Right? So therefore, the rabbis have the power to come and to relax it, right, when you have a loss. The Tanya was learned on the right. Rebbe says, V'zeh davar ha-shemitah shamot. Right? This is the matter of Shemitah. Shamot, relinquish. right? With two shemitot, the pasuk is talking about. Achat shmitat karka, v'achat shmitat ksafim. Whether you're talking about shmitat karka or ksafim. Bizman shata meshamet karka, ta meshamet ksafim. When you're going to be meshamet karka, you're going to be meshamet ksafim. Bizman shata meshamet karka, ita meshamet. If you do the shemitah on the karka, so then you have to do the shemitah on the money as well. If you don't do the shemitah on the karka, then you don't do it on the money. So this is the shita of Rebbe. So therefore, we're trying to say that it's going to be Rebbe. It's the Rabbanan. So for the rabbis, can make it a little bit more lax. Why? Because, in order that you don't get a loss. So says the Gemara, no. Why? Rava says no. Afilu temad Rabbanan. Even if we want to say it's the rabbis. And according to the rabbis, it's assumed doraita, even nowadays. Meaning somebody asks you, nowadays, is it Isur doraita shemitah or not? You have to tell them, machloket, Rabbi, Rabbanan. Usually we always pass them like Rabbanan, obviously. Right? So the rabbis say it's doraita. He says, avot asar rachmana. The Torah only prohibited avot melachot, like avot, primary laborers doing shemitah. Gimel amud aleph on the top. Toladot lo asar rachmana. The Torah did not prohibit a secondary labor, which is a toladah. And therefore, since watering seeds is considered a toladah, and not that you're actually planting the seeds, you're just watering it. So therefore, if it was mamash mina Torah, they couldn't permit you to do that. Because at the end of the day, it's Toraita, Sur Doraita, the rabbis wouldn't permit it. But since it's only the Rabbanan, but it's a Toladah, the rabbis could say, you know what, if it's going to be as a loss, so then they could be Mekeh. And we continue with Zat Hashem tomorrow.